I have for you a COVID update. I'm gonna go through these slides fairly quickly. I do have a handout that has a lot of this information in it. Not every single slide is there because some of them are there predominantly to give you an idea as to what we're looking at. So, as most of you know, SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, 2019-N COVID, all of these are the same names for the same things. And as just about everybody is aware, there are different variants that they are talking about that are coming up, and they label them according to the Greek alphabet. So the question arises, why do we have variants? And the reason for that is that coronaviruses are just horrible at making copies of themselves. And because they make bad copies, that means that every time they make a copy, they're making more genetic variability. Okay, and that's where this issue arises. That means that as time goes on, there will be small changes in the virus that accumulate and create families of the same virus with the same sorts of symptoms, the same sorts of ways of doing things. And that means that how it gets into the cell, which cells it gets into, how easily it does it, which cells can be affected, how many copies it can make of itself. For instance, the Delta variant makes 1,250 times as many copies of itself as did the original COVID strain. How effective it is at evading the immune system response, and that includes both natural immunity and vaccine immunity, and also how effective it is at withstanding the drugs that are used to treat it. So that's where the variations come from. To give you an idea, most people are familiar with the influenza virus. That virus has been around for a long, long time. And so we don't know how many, probably thousands to millions of copies, most of which have just disappeared. And there's some other issues with that. But every 100,000 people that are infected, you will get a new variant of the flu virus. In the case of COVID, it's every 1,000 people. And so the variability is really strong. Successful mutations have an advantage, and they make the other ones go away. And there are large numbers, again, that have the same root. You can truly think of this as a natural gain of function, right? That the virus is doing is it interacts with the environment and the people that are in it, and those that have been vaccinated and those that have not. It figures out ways to get around the immune system and to get around the vaccines. And because it has such a high mutation rate, it's able to do that quickly. March of 2020, this is what it looked like. All of these dots represents different strains. Notice that we have this one single line. It branches and then branches and branches and branches and branches. And by March of 2020, there were literally thousands of variants. And this is what the picture looked like at the end of December of 2021. Notice that a bunch of these have disappeared. You used to have the original strain. It has pretty much died out and it's being replaced by other strains. So that's going to be a process that goes on. Symptoms there in your handout to take a look at. They've changed over time. It's a wide variety of symptoms. If you're sick in any form or fashion, GI, respiratory, sinuses, it could be COVID. And that's the reality of it. The one really bad thing about this virus, when we compare it to the original SARS virus that came out in 2003, shedding, the virus that's put out into the environment didn't occur until day 3 when somebody was sick, and that it ended around day 16. In the case of this COVID virus, it starts 2.5 days before the individual gets sick, and it reaches its maximum before the onset of symptoms, okay? That's a problem because people walk around not knowing that they have it, passing it on, and that's why this is such an issue. Okay, so you probably have heard about breakthrough cases. And when they're talking about breakthrough cases, they're talking specifically about the vaccine, but you could also talk about other preventative methods. They thought originally that those who had breakthrough cases were all going to be sick. But what they have found out is that you can be fully vaccinated for the vaccine and get COVID and still be shedding and have no symptoms whatsoever, in which case you're going to shed for about 10 days, and nobody's going to know it. They thought initially that the shedding for those that are vaccinated was less than those that have the vaccine, and now they know that it's equal, that there's really no difference between those that are vaccinated and those that are non-vaccinated. We have cases out of Israel. 60% of the hospitalized cases are breakthrough cases, and the only ones they're really keeping track of are the ones that are really sick. Cape Cod, Massachusetts gave us also another insight. Here you had a total of 469 cases that occurred at a specific event, and because they knew everybody who went to the event, they were able to track down everybody and test everybody. What came out of that was that almost 80% of the breakthrough cases were symptomatic. They had illness, but 20% of the cases did not. No symptoms whatsoever, walking around spreading the virus. Okay. There were only 5 cases that were hospitalized. 80% of the hospitalized, 4 out of 5 were vaccinated individuals. Nobody dies, which is good news. Oops. All right, so one of the things that gets bannered around quite a bit is the efficacy of the vaccine. And they give you half the story, they don't give you the other half of the story. And the other half of the story is very important. The half that they give you is the vaccine efficiency. And what they look at is the absolute risk of somebody who is vaccinated of getting the disease versus the absolute risk of the unvaccinated getting the disease. And they get you a percentage number on that. Okay. The other piece of the information that the FDA requires them to give, but they have not been giving out for years and been getting away with this for medications as well, is the absolute risk. In here, you're looking at the number of people who get sick in a group versus the total population of the group. Right? This is your absolute risk of how likely are you to come down with the disease. A good example is we all know that, or most people know that trisomy 21, that you are 7 times more likely to have a child with trisomy 21 Down syndrome if you are over 40. Okay, sounds horrible, but the absolute risk is that you are 96.4% likely to have a normal birth, or something close to that. I may not have that exactly right, but it's in excess of 92%. I think it's 92 or 93. A normal birth, 92 to 93% of the time, right? And that 7 times increase sounds as horrible, but if we could all play the lottery and have a 92% chance of winning every day, we do it every day. Okay, so the absolute risk does become important. This is data out of Israel. They are, and again, they are having that 60% of the overall cases have been vaccinated. The important thing to look at here, and they keep talking about these numbers, and they're saying, well, if you're less than 50, the vaccine has a 91.8% efficacy. And when they look at all ages, it drops to 67. And that's because of how many people are in each age group. And they point out and tell everybody, well, you really need to get the vaccine. Even if you're over 50, it's still 85.2% efficacy. Okay, what they're not telling you is the absolute risks on these. So we took the same data and dropped it in to see what the absolute risk is. Now notice that this is not an absolute risk of either getting the disease or not getting the disease. The only group that they're looking at are severe cases and death. Okay, so that's where they're getting these numbers for, because the numbers look good for this. They don't look so good if you start including the other groups in there, which is why they just do that. So when we're comparing, your chance of having a severe case if you're less than 50 is 0.0039% if you are unvaccinated. If you're vaccinated, it's 0.0031. Well, that's almost a 10 times difference, right? The vaccine's definitely doing something for you there. But notice here that your chance of having either no COVID or a mild or a moderate case is 99.9961, with the vast majority of those being in the no, didn't get it. Okay, and that's, again, what they're not telling people. When you look at over 50, again, even if you're looking at The severe cases, it's only 0.0919% of those that are over 50 get a severe case, right? And that's not a trivial number, okay? In the vaccinated, again, you get about almost a tenfold, it's a ninefold reduction. So these numbers are important, but the absolute numbers are important too. And unfortunately, the CDC and others have stopped looking at and segregating out who has a mild case, who has a moderate case, and who has a severe case. The only thing they keep track of are the severe cases, right? Which means that they can't really put a number on this. You can make estimates to it as to what the overall percentage, 20% are going to be people who are going to have it and have no symptoms. The rest of everybody else, the vast majority of this 99.99 is and that's 20% of the people who had COVID, right? The vast majority of this number is going to be people who don't get the disease because its prevalence is still low overall in the world, okay? That's not to say that it's not a big deal. Huge take-home message here. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Don't touch your face, okay? That's how this is transmitted. 20 seconds with soap and water, the virus is done. 30 seconds with water, the virus is done. 4.5 minutes if you're using gelled alcohol. You cannot get enough contact time with gelled alcohol to kill a coronavirus. Certain flu viruses, yes, but not the coronavirus. Okay, when we're talking about masks, we got the cloth, we've got the surgical grade, and it has to say either medical or surgical grade, the N95s. We have some N95s with valves in them. We have both droplets, which is coughed out liquids that drop to the ground very quickly. Right, they're very heavy, and you have aerosols. Aerosols pass through every single mask except for the N95s. Okay, so your protection against aerosols is almost nothing when you're wearing a mask. Now, you're still getting some reduction. It's not as though it's completely zero, but it's not as helpful. Masks, really, particularly the cloth ones, will protect other people from your droplets, not your aerosols, right? And you really don't get much protection because it's not sealed, right? Unless you have a mask that is sealed, and people who wear sealed masks in the medical profession end up looking like this because it has to fit tightly. If it does not fit tightly, it will not prevent air from seeping down and around. Air always goes the easiest way possible. All right, so one other comment here. We talked about hand washing. Temperature measurements really are only going to be catching the people who are sick, and frankly, you ought to be catching yourself if you're sick. You'll know if you aren't feeling good, and if you've got a fever, then you need to stay home, okay? Remember that 20% of the people who have COVID have no fevers, okay? And they have no symptoms. And when you look at the one that showed what the symptoms were, fever shows up in about 75%, but that's still 25% of the cases that don't have a fever, in addition to the ones that aren't sick, right? So that's a large number of people who are not going to have a fever. And really, the whole thing of measuring temperatures does nothing more than make us feel better. Doesn't catch anybody in the first 2.4 days of incubation or any of the 20% of the breakthrough cases. Again, N95 masks, don't touch your masks, watch where you put your fingers. Surgical masks, medical grades, very limited help for others, some help for you, but not that much. Cloth masks, depends on the mask, but it may be better than doing nothing. There is this website, https with covid19criticalcare.com. There is a protocol for preventing COVID, and it has been used in India to bring the Delta virus to a grinding halt. It has been used in Mexico City to the same effect, that once they started disseminating the ivermectin widely to anybody who showed up and was related to anybody who showed up, they brought that outbreak to a grinding halt within weeks, okay? So you'll need to take a look at that. And then vaccination. Everybody's going to make their own choice as to whether or not the benefits for these new vaccines, for which we really don't have any long-term understanding of how they're going to work. We know that there are certain issues with them. We know that they have a death rate associated with them that is much in excess of any other drug or vaccine that's been brought to market. And usually if we get to 50 deaths, they shut those programs down, and we're well above that with the COVID vaccines. But they are touting that as your only option. The killed vaccine's not yet available, but will be another option. So if you have questions, you can talk to me afterwards. I'll do my best to answer those questions for you. But we're going to be dealing with these variants. There's another one that's already on the horizon that's pushing out the Delta, and we'll just have to see where those things go. And the big thing is if you're not feeling well, stay home. If you get in contact with somebody that you know comes down with it, stay home, right? These are the things that we just have to do. Get tested, make sure that you don't have it, and just take care to not transmit to other people. Social distancing is fine. If you've got more than a meter, in most European countries is what they require. Some is 1.5 meters. We do 6 feet, which they do. Some of them will do 1.5 meters, but that's about 6 feet. So, but these things are important. All right.